This is the Australian Curriculum for Science Term 2 Year 6, within a unit plan that will run for approximately 11 weeks. We would narrow our question to how would different environmental factors affect plant growth in week 3, and we will be answering through the following engage, explore and explain phases, which will focus on the physical conditions or abiotics and their impact on plant growth. Students will complete a predict, observe and evaluate style worksheet that will be glued into their science journals. It will allow students to keep a record of their own work while providing a way for teachers to review and monitor the progress. Students will pose their own question in relation to the environmental factor they're testing and demonstrate science inquiry skills of experiment report writing by drawing accurate diagrams, making observations and inferring from them, collecting measurable data and completing a table. Then they will attempt to answer their posed experiment question and address any alternative conceptions. Later they will have a discussion about their findings. The student's journal rubric aligns to the elaborations from Year 6 curriculum and is shown within the first column of the rubric. Students will be given a copy of the rubric and the teacher will mark it at completion of the sequence of lessons. Students are reviewed on the science understanding of the growth and survival of living things and how they are affected by their environment, science inquiry skills, and science as a human endeavour by posing questions, making predictions, and gathering data to explain scientific investigations. This feedback tool allows students to see a standard expectation and above expectation and showing areas for improvement.
There are many ways of knowing, such as religion or Indigenous ways. However, the specific information and vocabulary that is to be used and given to students will come from this current dominant scientific understanding, also known as the CDSU for plants. Students may come to the lesson with alternative conceptions about plants and how to scientifically explain phenomena. It is our job to move these ideas towards the CDSU, which is based on the most popular and well-tested ideas by specialists in their field. Previously, students have completed the life cycle of a plant as well as labelled its structures and discussed its functions. Students are aware of the basic needs of a plant. However, in upcoming lessons, students will be investigating how these basic needs affect plant growth. Like all living things, plants have basic needs. The importance of these basic needs differ widely among plants. Plants have the ability to spread throughout an area through their reproduction cycle, and it is influenced by biotic and abiotic factors. Biotic factors are living organisms that may affect plants such as humans and animals that feed on them. Abiotic factors are physical rather than biological, meaning they are not living, for example, temperature. Here is a quick recap.
Plant to stay alive. Plant to stay alive. It needs 5 things I would not lie. It needs 5 things I would not lie. Need 1, water. Need 2, soil. Need 3, space. Need 4, light. Need 5, air.
So how does water affect plant growth? Water is the main component of plant cells, and it is used by plants in the process of photosynthesis, as well as transports the nutrients throughout the plant. One part of the investigation students will be completing is to test for optimal amount of water for plant growth. Water has its own cycle, which are parts of the unit. The roots draw up water from the substrate, therefore water is essential for plants to produce their food. Another function of the roots is to collect nutrients from the substrate, which a soil is one of. Another part of the investigation students will be completing is to test for different types of substrate that allow for optimal plant growth. The soil contains many nutrients that maintain growth. They are divided into micro and macronutrients. 3 macronutrients that plants need in large amounts are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The nitrogen cycle will also be explored later in the unit. Overcrowded plants grow poorly due to the lack of resources. This means that plants are unable to fuel the growth of fruits and leaves. With an inadequate leaf size, plants are unable to effectively go through the process of photosynthesis, which will leave plants with a lack of food. The process of photosynthesis requires light from the sun. The more sunlight a plant is exposed to, the more compact it will grow. If a plant has minimal sunlight, it will grow elongated as it searches for the light. Seeds can germinate without light. However, once the hypocotyl breaks through the surface, it must have light to continue growing. The carbon dioxide that is found within the air is converted in the process of photosynthesis. The air can also be considered as wind. The advantages of wind are the ability to accelerate heat from the leaf surfaces and increasing circulation. The disadvantages, however, are excessive drying, weeds, and extremely windy conditions can destroy plants. The following sequence of lessons is conducted over a number of weeks, starting with a quick clip to engage students from the movie Biodome.
The KWL will be used to gauge students' current understanding of the topic being discussed. It will serve as formative assessment for the teacher, as well as being a valuable tool for students to reference throughout their continued learning. At this point in the lesson, only the K and W parts of the KWL will be utilised, as the final L section will be completed at the end of the sequence of lessons. This shows an example of what the KWL will look like at the end of this point in the learning sequence.
The behaviour managements for the engaging phase are: when transitioning, the teacher will number students 1 to 4, then send them off to their desks according to their number. When completing the KWL, noise will be kept at small voices according to the noise traffic light. During completion of KWL, all students will take turns in talking within groups, ensuring all students are able to contribute. The adjustments to be considered for the engaging phase are: subtitles to be played during the video clip for the student with a hearing impairment. During discussions, the teacher will wear a microphone for a student with hearing impairment. All ideas and thoughts will be written onto an interactive live software for students with a vision impairment, hearing impairment, or intellectual disability to be able to follow along during discussions. When completing the KWL, a student with a hearing impairment, vision impairment, or intellectual disability may require assistance from a teacher aide. Consideration of seating for a student with a physical impairment or vision impairment to enable them easy access to participate with video, discussions, and the KWL.
The risk assessment discussion will involve questions by the teacher. Questions could involve: what risks could be involved here? How do we minimise the risks? What are some safety rules that we need to follow when conducting an experiment? Following this, students will individually answer and complete Section P of the POE journal.
Exploring phase of the experiment, we will be looking at 3 different variables. The first investigation will be on the independent variable of substrates. While modelling the investigation, the teacher will pose questions to the students about the risk assessment. The resources we require for this variable are the 4 plastic cups, 4 seeds, being green beans, cotton, rocks, sand, soil. Students should have their method out in front of them to refer to, a marker in order to label the cups, water, and a tray to carry the investigation around. Safety goggles on. The first cup we will fill halfway with cotton. Now remember to label, that way you will know what each will be. We want to place the seed halfway down the cup along the side. This way, as the observation stages happen, students will be able to see the germination process of the seed occurring. Place a little bit more substrate on top, and then we'll start on this next one. Now we need to water our substrates with 50 ml of water. Students should remember to get down low and measure using their beaker. Place all 4 cups into your tray.
Another group will be investigating light exposure as the independent variable. The setup requires 3 cups with soil, 50 ml of water, and a seed to be placed halfway down the side of the cup. The test will have 1 in minimum light, 1 in slight shade, and 1 in full sun exposure. The last group of students will test water as the independent variable. Setup requires soil and seeds. However, one will have no water, 1 50 ml, and the third one 100 ml, all to be kept in a slightly shaded place. The behaviour management for the exploring phase are: when groups are collecting items, the teacher will need to send one group at a time, numbering students and sending specific numbers to collect different equipment. Students will be reminded by the teacher of classroom expectations when setting up their experiments. The adjustments to be considered for the exploring phase are: all ideas and thoughts will be written onto an interactive live software for students with a vision impairment, hearing impairment, or intellectual disability to be able to follow along during discussions. Instructions will be written onto an interactive live software for students with a hearing impairment, vision impairment, or intellectual disability to refer to using their devices. Assistance from teacher aid for students with a hearing impairment, vision impairment, or physical impairment will be required when collecting equipment.
Over 3 30-minute lessons, students will complete observations of the experiment and use the journal provided to record them. These lessons will connect directly to the explore phase of the 5Es and engage students in hands-on inquiry and investigative learning. Following on from students completing observations, the whole class will engage in a discussion about their observations and what they have inferred from them. Questioning from the teacher will guide this discussion. Questions the teacher could ask are, what were your observations? What were your observations? Why do you think that happened? Did you think that would be what happened? Why or why not? Throughout this activity, the teacher will be looking for students using scientific inquiry skills, inferencing, analysing, taking notes for observations, i.e. measurement of plants, and filling in data.
The behaviour management for the exploring phase of observing are: students will be reminded by the teacher of classroom and school expectations when moving around the room and school. The adjustments to be considered for the exploring phase of observing are: assistance from a teacher or teacher aide when observing the experiment for students with a vision impairment, physical impairment, or intellectual disability.
The explain phase encompasses the completion of observations, including the completion of student journal and KWL. Students will discuss their observations and inferences they have made based upon them in their groups. The teacher will engage in these discussions and misconceptions will be discussed.
Throughout the Jigsaw activity, the teacher will be looking for evidence of student learning through the completion of the KWL and students' ability to effectively communicate their observations and inferences to members of groups who didn't work with their variable. Following is an example of what the completed KWL could look like. At this point, the CDSU will be utilised by the teacher following group discussion to build upon the students' current understanding and further their learning, aiming